Also, on behalf of Ambassador Charlotte Schleiter, the Ambassador of Economic and Social Affairs at the Swedish Permanent Mission here in New York, really delighted to have you here. Thank you. Welcome, panelists. Welcome, representatives from member states. Welcome, colleagues from the UN Development System. And on behalf of Charlotte, I'm very delighted to be kind of co-chairing this with her. My role just is to start with is to get this conversation started, and I'm delighted to see such a great turnout, actually, even virtually. I'm looking forward to the day we can do this in person. I think we're getting close somehow. It feels like it's getting close. So soon. But let me begin. I think many people online are familiar with the parameters of the funding compact. I have a small presentation while I speak that will come up on your screen, I hope, Chris. But as you know, we are now 2 years into implementation of the compact since the adoption of this fairly significant major milestone in our collective efforts to work together. The compact, as you know, is a mutual accountability mechanism between member states and the UN Development System. And I've got some of the key characteristics of that compact in front of us now. And it really is crucial, and it serves as my summary form is that it's a set of commitments by member states to improve the quality of the financing of the UN Development System above all, and a commitment by the UN Development System to improve the way in which we manage those resources, if you will, fundamentally. But I can't emphasize enough how profoundly important getting this funding compact right is on the UN reform process. And if you look at the SG's report, if you look at the recent MOPAN report, if you listen to the resident coordinators and even agency heads coming from the field, there's still fundamental challenges of trying to match the way in which we are financed with the vision member states have of the UN Development System and where you see our added value. Program countries, donor countries, member states in general. Your vision is of a UN family that is very much policy oriented in most countries, working on strategy at the strategic level, convening, and being nimble and responsive to windows of opportunity to make policy breakthroughs on the SDGs. And on the other hand, the financing structure remains profoundly projectized, essentially organized around specific discrete sets of activities and outputs in a particular country. And all of our human resources, all of that policy capacity is linked quite directly to a particular output and an activity. And an auditor will make sure, indeed, that link is protected, because that's the accountability that you and we kind of understand. So it is extremely difficult to, if you will, square that circle when we have these differing incentives, differing systems, and really kind of, I guess, lack of flexibility to try and respond to the policy environment, which we are all kind of very conscious is the place where the UN Development System really needs to excel. So the funding compact is really a profound attempt to shift that model to the extent possible, but with a recognition, absolutely, that there's plenty the UN Development System can do to help itself and to help member states help us. The way we report, the way we manage your resources, the way we recognize core contributions and so forth. Overall, and the next slide shows a very bird's eye view of where we stand on the compact before we get into particular themes this morning. On the left side is the progress on the system, the UN system side of the equation. You can see from the green, which is kind of well advanced, and the yellow, which is in progress. At the UN side of the equation, we're around 70% of the commitments are moving either very fast or reasonably. We're confident about them. But we need to make a lot more progress in a number of areas, obviously 30%, and I'll come back to that. And on the member side of the equation, and we'll hear from Charlotte on that, so I'm not going to be steal her thunder on that, but it's just a bird's eye view, and we can see 35% rather than 70% of the commitments appear to be moving. So that we need a little bit more of a concerted effort on the member state side. Let me just provide very briefly from the UN side of this compact, of this equation, a few notes on where we feel we're making the most progress and where we've got the furthest to go, because we recognize absolutely that we also need to improve. We certainly need to improve our performance. I think on the good side of the ledger, on the UN side, take note, these 6 I'm just illustrating. Big jump in terms of evaluation officers now engaged in joint evaluation. More than half of them are now doing that, from less than a third a couple of years ago. That's great. The levy revenue has exceeded our expectations, and we are sort of projected to reach around $45 to $50 million this year on the levy, which is a nice surprise. I thought it would take a bit longer to get there, but it is a little unpredictable, but it seems to be on a healthy track. We're very pleased this rollout of UN Info, which is our basic infrastructure for tracking contributions in the cooperation framework and aggregating results and telling the story of the UN development system's impact on the sustainable development goals, is rolling out. We used the COVID crisis, and we still use the COVID crisis as the opportunity to kind of rapidly fast track at least one piece of the UN Info package. And every country team is using basically UN Info today on their COVID reporting, which is how we produced some fairly astonishing global aggregated numbers for 2020. But that's the core, but at least now they're all familiar with it, and we'll build on that to get the full UN Info functionality, which is quite complex. On the left bottom side, all of the entities submitting financial data to CEB now, and 93% of them disaggregating by country, which was another part of the commitments. The gateway on the special purpose trust fund is open and very much providing regular updates on funding, spending, and sources. And then finally, under the efficiency rubric, we're exceeding, we're ahead of schedule in terms of 100% new business operation strategies. We're at 95%, so we're really very close to the full package. So plenty of good stories to tell, and you will hear them during the course of this morning, but very tangible examples from the ground. And then we recognize some places where we really need to put more attention on the UN development system side. The funding frameworks at the country level certainly is an essential part of the new UN SDG policy and programming guidance. They are not yet fully internalized. They haven't been rolled out everywhere where we have a new cooperation framework. So we've got to really work on that and go back and look a bit at our guidance to see what can be improved. As I said, the results reporting on a comprehensive level, like we did on the SDGs, requires a lot more work on UN Info. We've got the backbone now, but it needs to be, it really needs to be built on. Agencies need to start putting in their annual work plans, a lot of other pieces than just the COVID tracking piece. On evaluation, we need more entities to disclose their evaluation reports on the UN evaluation group side. And we think that's a pretty low-hanging fruit. And the public audit platform needs a little bit of money to be put online. So we've just got an annoying obstacle to get moving on the commitments we made on disclosure around our audits. The common premises part under efficiencies gain, I think everyone knows, is going much more slowly than we had hoped. We're at 22% rather than, not on track yet to reach the 50% of common premises. So this is one piece that's moved more slowly for reasons we can get into if anyone wants to, very much to do with how to identify the costs required to try and make some of this, the capital investments required to make these physical transitions. And then two more, which is we have the need to have all of our members engaging their executive boards on these funding dialogues. A lot do today: FAO, IOM, UNDP, of course, UNICEF, UNFPA, UNEP. It's about 50% of our membership at this stage, but that's another 50% that don't. And finally, the IATI commitment to kind of reach those standards consistently in terms of compliance with IATI is 65% of our membership. We want to get to 100%. The big numbers are now the Secretariat. 15 of our 34 entities are under the Secretariat, under the Fifth Committee, and so we need that piece to move. Basically, it's the Secretariat piece that needs to move, and I'm very grateful that the controller of the Secretariat, Chandru Ramanthan, will be joining us actually for a little bit later this morning, and we can hear from him on that. The issue of the funding compact really has taken center stage in a lot of our discussions, and really the message has been reinforced, I think, by everyone, how crucial it is, and a recognition that we still have really to operationalize many of these commitments. The SG's report of his review of the functioning of the system, released just a couple of weeks ago, talks about the importance of the funding compact to get some progress on incentives and enablers for a more integrated approach by the UN Development System, a recognition that we need to broaden our donor base, and a strong recommendation that we double down on the funding compact commitments, both from the member state side and the agency side. The MOPAN study, which I believe was released on Monday of this week, or maybe 2 days ago, very important study of this reform, asking that question: is it different this time? And coming out, I think, very valuable report, very, very positive and very valuable in terms of its analysis. Also, coming back to this issue of the funding compact, recognizing modest advances on the member state side, and the need to really kind of transform towards higher quality, more predictable funding, not least also, of course, of the RC system itself. But the more fundamental issue is how the actual system is financed with funds and agencies and programs to reach this vision of our policy and strategy accompaniment of governments, member states to the SDGs. And then just to read out on that last example from the MOPAN analytical study, funding is a central risk to the reforms. Funding, and in particular the lack of sustainable funding for the RC system and limited progress by member states on funding commitments, present a major challenge for the reform's success. So I think this is a very timely conversation. The topic is absolutely on point. We will share this and all presentations while you're still online, so don't worry, we'll actually post them while we're online. And let me stop there now and pass to my co-chair, Charlotte Schleiter. Over to you, Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and good morning to you and everyone else. It's great to join you for this today. These are issues we talk and think about a lot internally, and I know it's the same for other UN member states because this is so critical. And yes, as you said, everyone here is familiar with the compact, but it was still very good to be started off by you, Robert, with the reminder of the main commitments that we have made as member states and that the UN system has made. It brings me right back to thinking why we agreed on this, why it was so important then. And of course, since then, it has become all the more critical with the pandemic setting us back the way it has, some say by decades, especially in some parts of the world. And we do need this strong multilateral response to reverse these trends. So this is urgent. Developing countries need support to tackle both immediate and long-term effects to the pandemic and build back better, build back greener. And this is why all this is something that's even more urgent than before. And we'll take lessons from the pandemic, and I don't think we know what they are yet. But one thing I think it has demonstrated the value of a coherent and coordinated UN system. And in that sense, also the UN reform process turned out to be very timely and has set us off in the right direction. Although, of course, much remains to complete, and that's work in progress. So, I mean, the funding compact is a key element of the reform process, and only, of course, one of them. But it's a necessary part. Without sufficient resources, all the good ambitions, plans, and systems will still not be able to deliver. So the UN needs to do its part, but so do member states, and we're falling short. I think. We saw also in Robert's slides that there's a number of things that we haven't been able to do the way we had committed to. So 2 years into the implementation, there hasn't been enough progress in shifting funding behaviors towards adequate and flexible funding. And the share of core funding to the UN remains unmoved. So first and foremost, we do need to increase the core support to the development system. It's hard to overstate the value of agencies having access to core support, and especially in circumstances like these that remain difficult and volatile, with more need for flexibility and acting quickly. So it does enable funds, programs, and specialized agencies to more rapidly respond to increasing needs and new developments, and step up and refocus without specific fundraising, but really having those flexible resources. Core resources are also necessary for things that tend not to be covered by other kinds of resources. There are normative mandates. The UN has a political role to play. There are universal principles to be upheld. Data and statistics, preventative work. The list could be long, but there are so many reasons, and of course others will add on to this better than I'm doing now. There are some figures that I'd like to refer to. The long-term trend in funding has been positive, so core funding has increased since 2003, but not as much as non-core funding. So 2019 core contributions are just 29% of total funding, and earmarked is obviously then 71. I'm not saying that the earmarked resources are not relevant and important, but the share of core has to be sufficient. That's the equation. So interagency pooled funds stands for a steadily increasing proportion of total non-core funding flows, and funding to these funds have doubled in terms of share in 7 years to 10% of all non-core funding. This is good, and that brings me to another point of that I'd like to raise. There are just 5 donors accounting for 70% of all the funding through this mechanism, in addition to my own country, Sweden, UK, Germany, Norway, and the Netherlands, and even more to come in for the system to pick up the way it should. Another aspect is predictability of funding, the part of the funding that's provided through multi-year commitment. There's an increased share of multi-year contributions, so a move in that direction. But then the number of multi-year contributors has decreased since 2017. So improvements can certainly also still be done when it comes to when during the year payments are done. Of course, the earlier the better for predictability. So yeah, we need to see more quality resources, and we need more contributors. There's a need to diversify the base of donors. Of course, we all stand to benefit from a strong and well-resourced UN system. And still the system depends on a small number of donors. A very positive trend, of course, is an increased funding by program countries. So that's something that it would be interesting also to hear your comments on later on. So there is a risk if the dominant funding of the UN development system continues to be earmarked project level contributions, that the reform agenda may fall short, and that UN funds or programs will be mere implementing mechanisms for other large vertical funds. And so really this is what I would like to throw in for today's discussion. And Sweden stands firmly behind our target of providing 1% of our gross national income as ODA. So we plan to remain a top donor to the UN system, and also we are one of the biggest contributors to core support. We have entered into multi-year funding agreements. It's challenging sometimes, both, of course, once when you set it up, it's challenging, but once it's up and running, it's a tremendous help both to us and to, as we understand, the UN recipient agencies. So we look to expand on this practice. We're also among the biggest donors to pooled funds, such as the SDG funds and the Peace Building Fund. And I will get back to the SDG fund in a moment before finishing my remarks. So we're convinced that flexible and predictable funding matters even more than we did before. And this is why you hear us repeat this over and over. But our flexible approach is also politically vulnerable should others not follow. And therefore, I hope that all countries strengthen their efforts to live up to their commitments on the funding compact. So at the end of the day, we do need to focus on ensuring that the UN can deliver better on the SDGs and help us build back better and greener. We all have a responsibility to make this happen. And I want to get back to the SDG funds, since it has once again been put a little bit in the spotlight as a centerpiece of UN reform. And now also, of course, for countering the setbacks on the road to 2030 that COVID has caused. The Secretary General reminded us of this recently, which was indeed very welcome, since the fund needs funding. We continue to be a substantial donor to the fund, and we believe that early results have been promising, and that it can provide an innovative tool at country level for UN agencies to work together with host governments and also raise other investments to make the SDGs the blueprint it is for recovery. So I hope financiers, large and small, from all parts of the world will consider contributing to the fund in the very near future. There is certainly no time to lose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I think I'm going to now, thank you for kind of giving that overview from a member state side. We're going to move into, and we're pretty well on time, the first of our three kind of substantive panels and sessions. And the first one is taking us to the country level. And we spent a lot of time, those of us involved in this funding compact in New York, looking at this through a global lens, but there are pieces of those commitments that are very much cooperation framework specific, country specific, and that's of course where most of the transactions are taking place between donors and the UN system. in terms of extra budgetary financing. So crucial that these principles are kind of reach the country level. And early on, RCs were asking us, well, what does this mean for us? The Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation agreed to do a study specifically on really how to get more out of the compact at the country level. What does it mean? And so we're delighted that Per Knudsen, the program director from Dag Hammarskjöld, will join us to present their, I think, almost finished study on this aspect, the kind of country level application. Per is a former head of RC office in Kenya, where a lot of innovation happened. And he is joined quite coincidentally by Stephen Jackson, the new resident coordinator in Kenya, who's leading the country team there. So we'll hear also from Stephen on how this comes together at the country level. So we have, I'm going to give the floor to Per. He has a presentation. Stephen, I think will respond a bit, and then we'll throw it open for discussion. Let's make sure we have 20, 25 minutes for discussion, if possible. So over to you, Per. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Distinguished colleagues, just to say also to the kind presentation by Robert that before I joined the UN in Kenya, I was head of the Swedish development as the head of multilateral coordination in Swedish SIDA. So I spent the last 15 years working on UN reform, going between the member state position, the country position, and now in between. 2 words on the foundation. Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation was established after the death of the second Secretary General by the Swedish Parliament, but also welcomed by the UN Resolution 1757. And we have an independent board with representation from the executive office in the UN, so that you feel sure where to place us. Now, I will, if we take us just to the slide, 2 slides away, scope and approach. Yes, thank you. I will try to avoid duplicating the rich information that Robert and Charlotte has given and take us, but I just want to mention to you that when we set out this study a year ago or a year and 3 months ago, we were going into an effort to understand how member states and the UN at the country level perceived the funding compact and also how they saw its influence.
Just a second, let me put him on mute.
You're doing the presentation.
Okay, let me just put him on mute.
Okay, so and to look at the funding compact's influence on funding behavior. Now the COVID struck at this time, so we did a first phase report, staying the course, which is focusing on funding and funding compact aligned responses to the COVID-19 in view of the efforts to protect the Agenda 2030. So that is on link with your, when you get the PowerPoint. Now back to the original study. We have since November had more than 65 conversations and consultations with both embassies and UN agencies, with RCs and RCOs in Guatemala, Indonesia, Jordan, Kenya, Malawi, Papua New Guinea. And despite the double burden of a pandemic and the work that the country level is putting in, we have been generously met and shared insights and analysis around the funding compact logic. So let's go then into next slide. I'm not going to say so much on the reason because Robert spoke to that, but just to say that if global commitments are not translated at the country level or countered by business as usual, it risks suboptimal development results. So if we demystify the funding compact, it's about really optimizing taxpayers' resources and integrating programming competences and mandates in the required way to meet the SDG challenge. So if we fail there and reside to business as usual, culture will eat strategy for breakfast, as they say. Next slide. Next slide? Yeah. So I would also like to make the point that when speaking to the country level, it's evident that it's beyond the funding compact indicators, which Robert and Charlotta referred to. The compact is a strategic framework for change and for accountability. And as such, it is a fundamental tool for actually going from the fragmented and piecemeal response to an effective multilateral response. And I think Charlotta's point on COVID is really important to carry with us. There would have been no socio-economic response plan worth anything, even though they didn't mobilize the money that they needed to have, if they had gone agency by agency and embassy by agency. And we need to learn from that going into the larger challenge on Agenda 2030. Next slide. Next one. We can take the next one. Yeah, thank you. So if we go into the findings, when speaking to both development and humanitarian players and RCOs across these 6 countries and 4 continents, the awareness of the funding compact as a agreed or welcome policy tool had very low awareness. It doesn't mean that the stakeholders, the embassies and UN agencies are unaware of the importance of predictable, flexible and innovative funding. That is certainly part of a very concerned and very important conversation in every country team and in every development partners group at the country level. But it means that the funding compact or the communication around it as a strategic push and a framework for change is grossly underutilized. And I take this opportunity to be explicit about it, because I think that if you from a member state want to see change happen, you have an opportunity here to really communicate down to the embassy level what you want to see change on the ground, and in that way empower embassies to work along the funding compact. The same goes for UN agencies, headquarters, heads of agencies were, I am very aware that heads of agencies are, as well as ambassadors and heads of cooperation, are bogged down with immense work. But even heads of agencies were quite unaware of the potential and the content of the funding compact. And that's significant aspect to bring forward. Next slide, please. Now, there are also evidence coming from these conversations that show some of the dilemmas and contradictions that can play with us and prevent us from being strategic. The UN has put an enormous effort into putting in place the new generation single strategies with the underpinning programming principles that member states have agreed that should be put in place. And yet earmarking, and quite hard earmarking, bilateral agreements are the dominant feature 2 years into the funding compact. So UN is sometimes referred to as agencies implementing bilateral strategy, and you go into the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, and you look for your bits and pieces. And this is also underutilizing member states' decisions on the reform, because optimally, of course, the cooperation framework is your multilateral framework for joint response. So here there are opportunity to move the strategic dialogue upstream and discuss how can bilateral comparative advantages influence or be part of discussions of the multilateral strategy, so that we can blend funding and share risk and also make more impactful results. My second point here is really that countries that refer to a leading role of national government and other national partners who are not only part of the governance structure of the cooperation framework or UNDAFs, which is an obligation, of course, for UN to put in place, but really where national players are becoming visible owners and leaders in strategic dialogue, that helps to actually bridge some of the bilateral and agency-specific silos and make discussions on joint funding and blended funding more possible. So that's also a takeaway. Next slide, please. A lot of conversation acknowledge the messages in the reform, both from embassies and from the UN, and the real urge to find integrated ways of bringing about transformation and SDGs. And many of the respondents say that while pool funds are not an end in itself, they are a potential strategic catalyst to bring about joint programming. In other words, if you have strategic joined up approaches, they can change the culture of behavior, bring together funding streams, share risk, and make the cooperation framework a larger and larger joint response. And we need good examples. There are good examples, but here there is a need for real leadership from both embassies and UN agencies to find these strategic opportunities and scale them up, so that you do not have a pool fund or a response just because you happen to be 3 agencies and 3 embassies in the same place in the same evening, but really because you are placing a coherent response to on a robust analysis and making the best offer to the country level. So here we have really opportunities, and I must say that it's admiring that there are a lot of push at the country level from some embassies and some agencies together with the RCs, but they need to be supported. The fourth finding here is the linkage between visibility and transparency together with innovation and flexible funding. And I will not go over it much because this is not a new question, but it's an important one. Some of the countries that do make the most flexible contributions and do give core funding to the UN, they are not helped very much in the cooperation framework or in the communication with host government on the benefits that core funding carries for that specific country. And when there is no such explicit communication, there is incentives rather to continue to fund small-scale projects and bilateral agreements, because they are visible to host countries, ministries, departments. So they're in the funding frameworks that the UN will put in place, and the strategic dialogue with member states, we need to try to come out with a complete picture of the results that are generated from both flexible and predictable funding and from locally generated and short-term funding. Now, I would very quickly take two more findings, and one is that at the country level, very many speak enthusiastically at the member state side to go from aid to development and expand funding to financing and leverage funding into the private sector. But and there are good efforts in Kenya, in Jordan, in Indonesia, in other places, but there is extremely little flexible funding around or risk investment from member states to put together these platforms. And in order to get the big corporates to connect to governments and local governments and to local private markets, the UN need to convene in professional ways. Here, the little access to core at the country level and the low margins of flexible funds on existing agreements limits a huge potential for the UN to actually convene and broaden SDG investment in line with the Addis action agenda. Next slide, please. I already touched on the importance to learn from the COVID-19 pandemic, and I believe that it was really evident in every conversation the value of a strengthened RC coordination and a strengthened coordination UN country team vis-à-vis member states. Many countries of the 6 talked about the rush in the beginning to go fastest, but no one made it in any significant way. So they came at halfway to catch up with each other. And it was UN who convened that. It was the new RCO economist function that was at the center of coordinating that analysis. We are seeing fruits of that small investment, but it's early on, and we really need to put effort into learning from it. If we want to have increased prevention of conflict instead of mitigation, if we want to advance on integrated climate financing and leverage development financing as the funding compact envisages, that needs to be taken to the next level. So I am closing here. I have integrated the 3 recommendations really in my presentation, and my short punchlines here is really if member states and the UN together with the host country really utilize the cooperation framework as their joint multilateral strategy, discussing their comparative advantages and how resourcing that strategy could be made visible, accountable, and recognized, we can go a long way. And I think there could be practical solutions. Many respondents would welcome that. If you designate 2-3 ambassadors together with 2-3 heads of agencies with the RC in a light team that looked at how do we unpack the funding compact and utilize its full potential at country level. That goes a long way. Joint analysis with retained respect for the integrity of UN's own CCA. There is also lessons to be drawn by UN agencies, not serving donors and member states with ready-made concept notes and projects, but rather involving them in the question on how do we respond to these more complex problems and how do we design the joint programs together so that we can actually share risk with more insight. So that's on joint analysis, planning and reporting. And my last point
Thanks,
is...
Per. Just go ahead. We'll
Yeah.
have to wind up. Go ahead.
Sorry, Robert, but my last point is really on the instruments, that there are many new examples of transformational multi-partner trust funds, and they are different and should be distinguished from pool funds that merely patch together resources but fund silo activities and individual agency initiatives. So we need to look and learn from the great catalyst role of the Global SDG Fund and look at the country level. How can you place some basic criteria so that agencies and donors qualify for integrated and transformational programming? Thank you so much, and this is really your leadership, and it's been inspirational to be part of this. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Per, and sorry for the time pressure, but thank you. I know there's a lot more detail in this study. Thank you, and let's go straight to Stephen Jackson in Nairobi to hear how it plays out also from that side of the equation. Stephen.
Thanks so much. Greetings, Ambassador, Excellencies, Robert, Per, friends. Greetings from central Kenya, where I'm watching a rather beautiful sunset over Mount Kenya from Nanyuki. Per knows our reality very well here in Kenya. As you know, he was our illustrious former head of office, so it's no surprise that there's a great deal of consonance between what he's presented at the global level and our experience in Kenya. So I can be relatively brief. Our overall message from UN Kenya, which, as you've heard, has been a pioneer, and I can say that with no lack of modesty, since I haven't been here, I have no credit for it. I only arrived 3 months ago, so it's Per and my 2 predecessors, RCs. Our overall message is that we see full implementation of the funding compact as really essential to our drive to deliver as one and to help Kenya bounce back better from COVID-19 and achieve the SDGs by 2030. So it's really essential for all of that. And yet we agree that the potential of the funding compact is really far from realized globally and to some extent at the country level. But I'll unpack that now. I want to organize my remarks around those 3 key areas of attention that Per has mentioned. So first of all, awareness and dialogue. There's relatively little brand awareness of the funding compact amongst representatives of partners on the ground in Nairobi. There is still far too much bilateral dialogue, by which I mean an individual UN entity to individual international partner, and just not enough strategic dialogue. I'm also concerned, of course, that as ODA declines to Kenya, with Kenya having become an LMIC, and also, of course, because of the impact of COVID on budgets, I think both earmarking and that kind of bilateralism of partnership may risk becoming more pronounced rather than less. So we might actually lose some of the gains. But now to the optimism. First of all, we're breaking ground now on our new cooperation framework, and that's an opportunity for us to continue to innovate. We want to sign that with government mid-2022. And amongst the opportunities is really to elevate our dialogue with all partners, national, international, public, private, to the strategic level. We're already, and I think the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation report notes this already, we're already blazing the trail on creating a strategic dialogue with the European Union. We're identifying and intensifying that dialogue towards a strategic partnership that's anchored in both dialogue and we hope a joint innovations fund. We'd be passionately interested, of course, to broaden those discussions to other partners on the call. And we could foresee, as Per hinted there, some kind of a loose joint structure between myself as the resident coordinator on behalf of the UN system and perhaps the leadership of the Development Partners Group in Kenya. Second point, shared analysis, planning and reporting. There's really a major opportunity here. We've already got some good pioneering work that was created under my predecessor again with the World Bank, where we have joined up analysis on a monthly basis on northern and northeastern counties of Kenya, where we're looking at a matrix of risk around climate, conflict, and the socioeconomy. And of course, the flip side of risk is resilience. And that analysis is better informing and aligning our programming with and alongside the World Bank. We are just now finalizing the first internal draft of our new CCA, which will then go on to ground our cooperation framework. We're, of course, going to engage government in that discussion, but that CCA will be a main opportunity for us to engage strategic dialogue with the other partners so that we arrive at a shared understanding of where Kenya is on its trajectory towards the SDGs. Finally, at the instrument level, the third of Per's areas of attention, I think this is really where UN Kenya has seen the most innovation over recent years, but also where there's an enormous amount of potential still to capture. We've been driving the transition from a funding to a financing model principally through this flagship joint SDG public-private partnership platform in Kenya that was co-created with government and launched in 2017 at the GA. It has 4 windows that align directly with the government's Big 4 agenda. Of those, I think 2 are the most extant. The private healthcare window, which has already lined up $150 million of investment for the private for primary healthcare. But the agriculture and food security window has an equally impressive pipeline. And underpinning both of those are joint analytics around health sector investment, finance, trade and investment, the agriculture and food security sector. The platform is grounded as of now in its own multi-partner trust fund. And our ambition now, as we go on to our new cooperation framework, is to ground that CF in Platform 2.0. We really want to crowd in profit making for purpose investments to drive Kenya towards all of the SDGs. And I'll just drop a hint and say that I think it would be a big surprise if green, blue, and resilient financing wasn't a major focus of that 2.0 platform. Almost done, you'll be relieved to hear. We've benefited enormously from 2 multi-partner trust funds that exist at the global level. One is the Joint SDG Fund. We've benefited in UN Kenya and I as RC for the previous 4 years in Gabon. We also enormously benefited from that instrument, which allows us to pilot and drive through what I call pathways through the clearing. The 17 SDGs come together in a very complex way. The Joint SDG Fund obliges you to identify theories of change that really cut through that complexity and accelerate you towards the SDGs. First round, social protection. Second round on integrated national financing frameworks. Kenya has benefited enormously from both. Finally, and I think most exciting, as I mentioned already, what we want to do is ground our new cooperation framework in a one fund to power Kenya's journey towards the SDGs. And Jennifer Topping will be addressing you later on. We've been working extremely closely with her and her team in the MPTFO. This public-private partnership platform has been a really useful front runner, showing us how joint action can work, how crowding in both public and private investment into a pooled structure can really work. Let me then appeal to you and say there's massive potential for you as representatives of your governments and your partnerships in New York to send key funding signals to the UN on the ground in country, to government in country, funding signals that really drive and incentivize joined up planning and programming. So we really need your support on that. And a final comment, now the egotism, the newly empowered RC system. But I really think I can salute the leadership of my two predecessors, Nardos Spekeley-Thomas and Sid Chatterjee, both of whom really used that empowerment to break through the silos and the ceilings, really refused to take no for an answer from UN entities or partners, or indeed, Robert, once upon a time from HQ. I really am happy to report that there is a new spirit abroad. UN Kenya, I think, is determined to work ever more closely together. We need you, the partners, to incentivize us, carrot and stick, to do that. And I know that my predecessors would join me in saying that fully implementing the funding compact is really an essential prerequisite for that. So thanks very much, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you, Per. You've set the stage kind of beautifully for how this has to play out at the country level. I want to ask our participants, we have, I think, 80, 90 participants, to identify themselves if they'd like to speak now. We have 15 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, we have 140 participants. If you'd like to speak, ask a question, make a comment. If you could just in the chat identify yourself, name and where you're from, and I will call on you. Sorry for not giving you more warning. So please use the chat. We're monitoring it. I think I'd like to sort of make the point as well that so much of what we're trying to do globally under this compact, of course, has to be anchored at the country level. I mean, we can't. The experience of the COVID reporting, of getting some global aggregated numbers on our impact on the socioeconomic aspects of COVID in 2020, basically depended on us getting the inputs country by country and agency by agency, country by country, and only the RC office could really pursue that and give us that granularity. We can't run it sort of at headquarters. It's got to be built from the ground up. The same, we can agree on all the policies at the center on how to give greater recognition to core contributors, but if it's not actually then played out at the country level, that's sort of especially important, I think, for core contributors. It's that visibility, that recognition is done at the country level, not just kind of at the stratospheric level in New York. So I think that, again, it has to be translated at the country level. The funding the funding dialogue needs to be, we need a different mix of core, non-core, trust fund, private sector financing in every single country context. We can create the enabling environment, we can create the incentives at the global level, but at each country level, a formula, the right mix that works for the donors, that works for the host, the program country, that works for the UN has to be established. And that, again, has to happen country by country. We just can't. So it's so important that we take this funding compact to the country teams at the country level. And it's concerning, as Per said, the first conclusion was that not many people know about it. And it's a missed opportunity, both by the UN to kind of, if you will, put a little bit of moral, at least, pressure on their donor counterparts, but also for the donors to put a bit of pressure on the UN country team to step up to the plate in terms of their commitment. So let's make sure we disseminate it a little better after this meeting. Marcus, a call from Germany is going to take the floor. Marcus, thank you for breaking the ice. I hope there's a few more, and then Sweden. Terrific. Marcus, go for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also, thank you, Per, for this presentation, and also, Stephen, it was great to hear from Kenya. We are definitely looking forward to read the final report in fall, and this information is very useful for us. I mean, 2 years into the funding compact, we are indeed looking at a very mixed picture of progress, and we acknowledge the need for all parties involved to step up to further fulfilling commitments. On the link between headquarters and country teams, we agree that without effective synchronization, the UNDS reform cannot be advanced, and results at the country level is the single most important proof of the reform's relevance. So if we look at our funds and programs, our structured funding dialogues could therefore dedicate more and also put special attention to the country level to bolster the headquarter UNCT link. And I was also quite intrigued by the explanation that there's actually a lack of awareness about the funding compact on the ground. So I think for us it would be interesting also to, I mean, it's a value proposition with the funding compact and all what it entails. So for us it's interesting to know maybe from a country perspective how tangible this for local stuff the promises of better impact are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcus. Let's turn to Rebecca Hallin from the Swedish mission. Rebecca, you froze right at the wrong moment. Now, hello? Is she in the office beside you, Charlotta?
She's in another office which seems to have insufficient network.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Rebecca, no, we're not. Why don't you just react a bit to Marcus's comments before while we wait for Rebecca to come on. Stephen, did you want to perhaps react?
Yes, thank you, Robert. I was struck by 2 points. One on synchronization. I mean, I couldn't agree more. If I can be very sort of blunt about it, it was already highlighted by the ambassador that the Joint SDG Fund needs replenishing. And the fact that it is in need of replenishment is hampering efforts at the country level to roll out some of the key instruments for this, principally the Integrated National Financing Framework. So in a sense, we really need to make sure that we are synchronizing in a way that will support us. The other point, the lack of awareness, just listening to Marcus there, made me think that it would be enormously useful to repeat this exercise at country level, perhaps based around the report itself. Maybe at the very least, those of us that were the test case countries could ask that we would do that. I would love to hold an event like this with your counterparts here on the ground. Thanks. Back to you.
Thanks, Stephen. Rebecca, are you on, or we've lost you for good?
From
Rebecca,
now.
go ahead. Good. Well done. You're back. Now you're muted. Oh dear. Now you're frozen. Sorry, Rebecca. I don't know. We'll turn to Sarah Offerman. Thank you, Sarah, at the Netherlands mission. Over to you. We'll have one last try for Rebecca, and then we'll have to probably give up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Robert, and also Charlotta and other speakers for hosting us here today in what is quite an important and a timely discussion, of course, also against the backdrop of the RC system review and the strategic plan discussions. As you know, the Netherlands is a really strong proponent of both the reforms and the funding compact. We're also, as you know, usually quite a difficult or a critical proponent, may I say. Also knowing from experience how difficult it is to get large institutional entities to do something differently, to change their ways of acting and to change their ways of financing, speaking for ourselves. So we've seen a couple of really good introductions here today that give us a bit of a feel of how full or empty the glass is. And Robert, I liked your statistics on, what is going well from the agency side, from the UN side, and from the donor side, the 70%, 35%. I guess in terms of impact on the ground, it's very hard to measure what has the biggest impact on progress on the ground. But we've heard some really positive examples today of countries where things are going well, where country teams are really pulling together around the common country analysis, around the cooperation frameworks. And we get that same feedback from our embassies in the field. So in some countries, we get some really positive, anecdotal, I guess, still evidence of the reforms taking place and having an impact. And I think the biggest challenge now is how can we institutionalize that and make that more structural. And that's a discussion we're having, of course, also in the context of the RC evaluation. I guess there's two things of concern that have already brought up by others been brought up. And one is, and I'm eating a little bit into the next session, but is of course the lack of financing for joint work. And I was at the meeting with the DSG about a joint SDG fund. We heard the results that the fund is achieving. And it's really worrisome that there's so many people in this virtual room, so many delegations who subscribe to the UN reforms in theory, and yet all the funds that are meant to underpin it, Special Purpose Trust Fund, Joint SDG Fund, COVID Response and Recovery Fund, are underfunded. And I think we need to have a discussion about how one side of the funding compact incentivizes the other side, right? So how can we better show those impacts of the reforms to our capitals and show that there's actually a business case to be made for investing in joint funds, pooled funds, also core. And the other way around, how can we as donors incentivize the UN to do better? And this is a part of that discussion, but we need to continue to have it. One other concern that that we're having, and maybe concern is a strong word, but we're having a lot of discussions with the funds and programs about their strategic plans. And obviously, this is the moment where agencies can show through their strategic plans that they're taking the reform seriously. And we definitely see steps being taken, but I think what is still lacking a little bit from our perspective is the idea that those strategic plans are really underpinned by one sort of common system-wide intervention logic, if you will, a theory of change on the basis of which all the different agencies, based on their comparative advantages, work towards that same goal. And I think if we don't get that right now, that's a missed opportunity for the years to come, right? And the fact that the integrated resources and results frameworks that are mandated by the QCPR are not ready yet is not making it easier, I guess, for the funds and programs. But I really hope that, through those discussions, we will see the reforms strongly reflected in the final versions of the strategic plans. And I guess maybe if we have time for a bit of discussion, I would be interested in hearing from people in the field how the strategic plans actually inform your work and to what extent it is important that you see those reforms strongly reflected in them. So I guess, is the glass half empty or half full? I'm not sure yet. It's maybe early days to say, but it's fair to conclude that there's no way back, right? We're doing this together, so we might as well stop dragging our feet on all sides, definitely including on the donor side, and fulfill the full potential of the promise that the reforms hold. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Good. I want to come back on some of your comments too. Very useful. Charlotte has been promoted to. Sorry, not Charlotte. Rebecca has been promoted to Charlotte's computer. Go ahead, Rebecca. Thank you for your patience.
No, and thank you for yours. Let's cross our fingers that third time is the charm. I wanted to I'm going to build on some of the things that Sarah just said. First, we're talking about different guiding documents. The strategic plan is obviously one of a centerpiece, but another one is the UN SDCFs. And I took note of what Pat said before about their, challenges of aligning national plans with UN SDCFs. And I would like to know more about those challenges, because I think one thing that we benefit on this level at HQ or in missions, fairly far removed from the field, is understanding the actual concrete issues and challenges that you run into. And that also involves, and something that I would like to see more of in this conversation is also the perspective of program countries. Because of course, this intersection between the UNSCCF and the national plans, that's kind of where, the rubber hits the ground. So that's one. Another thing, when we talk about business cases, not only inside of the UN and the international organizations, it's also in synergy with the private sector. Like how do we get more engagement? And not only the private sector as in companies, but also in the financial markets. And how can the UN find like this bridging? Is there a potential for bridging that gap in order to fulfill our commitments towards the SDGs, for example? So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you. And I'm going to hand the share back to Charlotte.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much. And so let's, we've just got 5 minutes. We need to close on. Let's, if I can, let's address Sarah and Rebecca's comments and start perhaps with Per and then Stephen, and then I'll bring it to a close. And I'd like to react also myself to some of the comments. Thank you. Per, over to you.
Thank you so much. I thank you for the critical comments, and if I reflect back on respondents across these 6 countries and include my personal experience, you couldn't be more right that if we are going to go anywhere on the SDGs, people both on the embassy side and the UN side, they agree that you need to up the game. You have to have a stronger coordination. You have to have a better blending of public investments from the government and the catalytic capacity and access to global capacities through the UN, but also other players. So my points, or the points that I brought from the country level, is that the new generation of strategic framework can convene that kind of dialogue, and we have to utilize it. But the UN cannot utilize it by themselves. It's evident that even though when RC push, the punching power is much greater if there is 3-4 embassies saying the same thing to a minister. We would like to see you address socio-economic transformation together with us and the UN. So there is I think low-hanging fruit, even though I dislike the word. There are opportunities that we have not fully utilized by bringing together stakeholders around the strategic dialogue, and then you can add resourcing and funding to that. Thank you. Thanks,
Per. And Stephen, particularly you want to pick up on Rebecca's questions about how do you get that alignment and how do we engage the private sector and markets a bit more effectively. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Robert, and thanks to the questioners. I mean, I think the 2 sets of questions and observations really lie together very well. If we start from the point about financing for joint work, as I mentioned in my brief presentation, a lot of what the Joint SDG Fund funding has gone towards is integrated national financing frameworks, and we need more of those. Now, what do? They're precisely about trying to achieve leveraging by aligning public and private, both national and international resources towards national priorities and the SDGs. So it's the kind of the magnet effect. It's not that the UN is omnivorously wanting to consume all of these resources itself. It's about how we can help to direct these much larger flows, including from capital markets and including through innovative financing instruments. I mean, we're one of the things the Joint SDG Fund is funding for us right now is developing an impact bond, a social impact bond around adolescent sexual and reproductive health. So I think there's real opportunity to use the leveraging and the convening power of the United Nations with actors, including private capital markets. And that leads me straight away then, Sarah, to your other point about having a kind of not only a UN system-wide theory of change, but actually a theory of change that would be ideally shared across partners and government, right? And so that's where the new generation CCAs start, that if we can have a shared vision of where the country is and where it wants to be, then and what the theory of change is that will drive that, then our cooperation frameworks almost write themselves, would be my argument. So very pledged to that. We're right in the middle of that experiment in Kenya, and we'll let you know how it goes.
Thanks, Stephen. If I may, just a couple of observations from my side. One is where we have governments that have a SDG strategy, where they've signed up on Agenda 2030, where we have governments that have a robust UPR set of actions, where we have a government that has put out on the HLPF a set of kind of SDG priorities, costed, which by the way is very, very rare, then we have a framework already that we start negotiating inside, and the alignment in a sense is kind of already there if we all share the same endpoint, which is the Agenda 2030. Not all governments have internalized the Agenda 2030, of course, not all of them have it, but you can really tell you can tell the difference between a cooperation framework that's essentially aligning to a national strategy, which is very much SDG friendly and focused, and one that is trying to somehow sort of encourage the government to internalize that, which is a very different exercise. So the more, and it's very difficult to use the cooperation framework as the lever to kind of push the country. It's a little late in the process. I've tried it on various occasions and not always very successfully. I think I just also want to pick up on Sarah was kind of asking about how do we make sure these strategic plans, all of them at the corporate level, and not just in New York, but in Geneva and Vienna, they all kind of align around a common, you talked about a theory of change, and I would say also a common vision of where is the UN's value proposition collectively on the development side. And, the SGs, given that at a very obviously strategic high level, but it did need a little bit more elaboration. And the system-wide strategic document, which has become a bit of a dirty word, but it was intended to be that instrument. And when I first learnt about the system-wide strategic document, for me, it was, as a resident coordinator, the idea that I had something quite tangible around which to also structure my dialogue with government about the comparative advantage of the UN system. This is what my bosses, my executives, are saying about where they see our long-term future, what we want to be remembered for, which doesn't, what should I say? It doesn't preempt the government's priorities in terms of where they want the UN, what they want from us, but it just sets a kind of global framework which says we want to be conveners, we want to leverage our policy depth. We want to be remembered on leave no one behind and the difficult issues around tracking and monitoring and awareness raising. And so that for me was what the system-wide strategic document, that was its intention. And I thought it might even, and this was a little bit heretical, but I thought the system-wide strategic document could even offer a few global outcome statements that countries could use in their cooperation frameworks if they wanted to. They didn't have to, but if they wanted to take some off the shelf, and I thought that this would help us build a kind of global vision, bring us together. But the system-wide strategic document has disappeared, as you know, into a debate about what it could and should and shouldn't be. And it really, there is no, to be fair to everyone, there's sort of no consensus on it. So we just didn't emerge out of it. But it was in the essential design of this reform, and it's still missing, Sarah. I think that's what you're missing, is something that helps connect all those strategic plans and helps connect 131 cooperation frameworks beyond the SDGs, which are, and beyond the kind of SGs, very high level strategic vision. So let's not lose sight of it. I thank you so much for kind of giving me a chance to plug it, because I do feel it's, I spent a lot of energy on it during the transition team and then was sad to see it die quietly. With that, thank you for your patience. Thank you for these fantastic interventions and for the contributions of our participants. Per, big thank you for the work of the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation. And Stephen, thank you for sharing your sunset. And with that, let's turn to our next agenda item. And Charlotte, over to you for the convening.
Thank you, Robert. Let's move straight into our next panel, which is on flexible and pooled funding. The heading is From Projects to Integrated Policy Support, what next for flexible and pooled funding, which tells you a little bit about what this is going to hold. We have three panelists. I will introduce, they're well known to all of you. It's Anita Bhatia, Deputy Executive Director for Resource Mobilization, Sustainability and Partnership for UN Women. Hi, Anita. Good to see you.
Hello there.
Brian Williams, Branch Chief, Policy and Programming Branch, UNDCO. Hi, welcome. And then Jennifer Topping, Executive Director for the UN Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office. Hi, Jennifer. So we have until noon for this panel. So if I could ask each of you to start us off rather briefly, maybe 1 minute less than you had thought, because we're running a little bit behind, so that we can then open the floor up and have an interactive dialogue where you can come in and respond to the questions that participants will have. May I start with you, Anita, please?
Yes, thank you so much, Ambassador. And I'll try to be brief in the interest of time. And I'm going to turn my video off because I'm in a place where Wi-Fi isn't great. So we may cut out. So to avoid that risk, I'm going to go off camera, but come back on if as needed. So thank you so much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting UN Women to participate on in this informal consultation. And it's really a great pleasure to be here. I think, I've been listening for a while to the previous panel, and I don't think it comes as a surprise if I say that it's pretty clear that if we want to implement the 2030 agenda and to leverage multiple financial flows, with ODA, of course, being an essential component of the development and the finance architecture, that we are going to have to do things a little differently. I think if we look back to the funding compact and just remind ourselves of its vision based really on stewardship and to guide member state funding behavior in the right direction so that the UN could mobilize collective integrated capacities to achieve the SDGs. And if we look back at what it called for, which was increases in predictable, flexible, and pooled funding, and then we look at the state of affairs where the majority of UN system funding is hard earmarked, channeled through projects, and therefore actually less flexible, less predictable, and definitely more fragmented. And we look at the data that 80% of member states' voluntary contributions to development assistance activities is earmarked. I think we would have to conclude that actually very little progress has been made on increasing flexible funding, and that the share of core funds to the UN system remains essentially unchanged. And, you know, from our perspective, looking at our experience on the ground, I think it's pretty clear that when you have short-term earmarked projects, that there are much higher risks of strategic divergence and lack of coherence, and that we are missing opportunities for long-term strategic partnerships, which can be enabled by regular resources. And that if we truly want to move from this project-based approach to being the uncontested providers of policy advice on the SDGs, that we will probably fail short of the aspirations of UN reform, and that we will remain in the world of being implementing partners for large vertical funds, for IFIs, for bilateral aid programs. So, you know, the question of the role of the funding compact cannot really be separated from obviously UN reform, but also our broader vision around, you know, what is our real value add in the development world. And so I think the issue of increasing core and flexible funding I think does help us drive better mandate-driven results, reduces transaction costs, reduces fragmentation, creates more synergies. And I think we have in UN Women had some really good experiences with you know, flexible funding mechanisms. If you look at the multi-year Spotlight initiative, and I think we can say, yes, notwithstanding some bumps, that it is contributing to more coordinated and efficient delivery at the UN country team level. And resident coordinators are working with different UN agencies to bring the system closer together. I think we have good examples from the UN Managed Trust Fund on ending violence against women as well, the Peace and Humanitarian Fund, but then also most recently from the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Partner Trust Fund, where we saw that the use of targets and markers actually help to drive funding to gender equality. So I think without underestimating the importance of joined and pooled funds for more coordinated and coherent action, I think I would say that adequate core funding still remains pretty irreplaceable for UN entities to carry out their mandates. And I think that the framework of the funding compact is actually a very powerful tool in getting us there, but we will need urgent changes in funding behavior. And then one last point is, this is a real opportunity for us, thinking that none of these constraints to increasing ODA, recognizing that none of these constraints are going to go away in the short or medium term. It is probably worthwhile for the UN system to invest much more in utilizing what one of the speakers previously alluded to, which is in using the core funding more catalytically and investing in UN system capacities to do more blended finance, so that the core funds can be stretched much further, and to really see which are the sectors where we can really drive changes and outcomes through blended finance. And obviously it lends itself better to certain sectors like infrastructure and remains largely untested for certain sectors such as the social sectors. But it is worth thinking through and discussing how the UN system can build capacities to do more blended finance, to learn from the examples of the very large blended finance facilities out there, particularly on climate and infrastructure, to see how we use those lessons and adapt those modalities for SERPs and national financing plans as well, so that we are not just talking about this vast pool of private capital sitting with pension funds and institutional investors, but actually seeking very specific, ambitious programs that underlie, that exemplify the best of our policy advice, but couple that with innovative financing as the way forward. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Anita, for underlining also the effects of too limited a proportion of core in terms of divergence from strategies, and also lack of coherence. And I also take note of your suggestion that funding, core funding, be used more catalytically. I would like to move straight on to Brian, if you will please speak next.
Great. Thank you so much, Ambassador, colleagues, excellencies. It's great to be here. I'm going to speak to two very specific pieces of this puzzle, and so hopefully that allows me to be succinct and save the time for discussion. The first piece of the puzzle is guidance on joint programs, and the second piece of the puzzle is going to be UN funding frameworks. So this is the budget for UN programs at country level. So first on joint programs. There is guidance from 2014 that is out there on how to do joint programs, and our ambition at the moment is to completely overhaul those. This is anchored in the QCPR request, of course, which says, and I quote, that we should use the cooperation framework to substantially increase common resource mobilization for joint programs at country level. And it's also, of course, part of the funding compact that we're here today for. Our ambition is not simply to update that 2014 guidance with, okay, there's been a delinking and there's been some other mechanical changes, but to really do a fundamental rethink about how joint programs can be more catalytic to achieve SDGs. So we don't want joint programs just to be a convenient way for a bilateral donor to put some resources into, a project that brings together a few different agencies. It's about making sure that when we're coming together, we're doing the strategic thinking about what can we do collectively in a particular area that is going to advance and accelerate the SDGs. So we have to go beyond the mechanical value of joint programs, which is already important, and really get to its more strategic and catalytic value. And I think here we're trying to echo in an instrument terms what Per was talking about earlier about really trying to have transformative action. We're pretty far into this process, but because it's a big overhaul and a fundamental rethink, it is going to take a little while. We've established an interagency working group. We have sitting on there UNDP, UNFPA, UNICEF, UN Women, WFP, ILO, UNHCR, of course, NPTFO. So we've got an interagency group that's looking at this. We've got some external expertise helping us with it. They've done a first stock take, and a couple of the lessons that come out of this first stock take already. We need something that is much more user-friendly and which explains to those interested in joint programs how it needs to be this strategic and transformative thing connected to the cooperation framework, but it needs to be more user-friendly. The management and governance arrangements of it need to be more explicitly aligned to the mutual accountability framework, the MAF, as well as the funding compact. We need to have better incentives for people to join those joint programs. So let's say, it's not just about being user-friendly, but it's about thinking through some of the incentives related to the cooperation framework that make people want to join those. And we need to have probably a bit more in terms of options around lighter joint programs that have reduced transaction costs, as well as some of the more complex ones, which have a certain investment in their elaboration, but then should really yield much more transformative results. I also wanted to mention that we're following what's happening in the executive boards, and we know that many agencies, funds and programs, executive boards, there are clear calls from those board members that we have a better system-wide definition of what joint expenditures are. And so in the context of this guidance for joint programs, we're also looking at that. As we go forward in this, we do think it would be good to have some kind of interaction with member states, with those partners in particular who are investing in these joint programs, to make sure that we're getting incentives right across the board. So this was a little update on joint programs. I will just take 1 or 2 more minutes, if I may, to talk about another piece of the puzzle, which is UN funding frameworks. So there is sometimes some confusion between, okay, what's financing and what's funding? So what I'm talking about here in crude language is budgets. So under the old system, under the UNDAF, it was called the Common Budgetary Framework. In the new system, they're UN funding framework. So this is resource mobilization for the UN. How can we do that in a more transparent way, in a more collaborative way, in a more collective way? First of all, we've already issued new guidance around funding frameworks, and this takes into account all of the requirements that come from the funding compact. So we've got the guidance in place. Secondly, we've shifted the timing of this. So now the UN funding framework is done after the signature of the UN SDCF, of the cooperation framework. We've done this to make sure that it is the content that is driving the budget and not the other way around. We don't want the cooperation framework is about strategic thinking that starts from the analysis in the CCA. It's not about, okay, what is my ongoing budget and what needs to be in the budget, and okay, now let's tease together a program collectively. So by putting the funding framework afterwards, we hope it'll really change this. How are we doing so far? If you look at those cooperation frameworks that started either in January of 2020 or January of 2021, 51% of those have funding frameworks already. That's not nearly as good a number as I'd like, a better number is if we look at the 2021, so those that now have more than a year under their belt of implementation, there we're at 10 out of 11. So we're at a much better number there. And in terms of the cooperation frameworks that started this year, we think, in the coming months, in the coming month or two, we're really going to see a lot of growth there because it's sort of the season right now. We have more experience under our belt. We're going to put in place peer exchange and knowledge learning. Some of the countries that are doing a great job are going to get the word out to others. So we really expect in the coming period that we'll get a lot more of those done. I wanted to say two last points. First is, in order for cooperation frameworks and funding frameworks to be meaningful, it needs to be the annual implementation that really works. So there are joint work plans that are done year by year at country level, and we're looking here towards the leadership of all of the agencies, because on a thematic basis around outcomes, we have different agencies that chair results groups, and these results groups need to be putting together strategic annual work plans around the different outcome areas, whether it's social protection or whether it's environmental protection, for example. And these joint work plans are critical. If you don't get that implementation bit right, then the rest remain sort of aspirations, but are not meaningful. And connected to that, and I'm foreshadowing here the next session, is UN Info. So for UN Info to bring all this together and to make that transparency finally complete, we need to have those joint work plans so that the data going into UInfo is good. Thanks very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for the updates on the joint programs guidelines and your early findings of what it will take, and also for explaining a little better about the UN funding framework and not taking for granted that we all know exactly how that works. That was very helpful, and I'm sure we'd like to follow up. Jennifer, over to you.
Thanks very much, Charlotta, Ambassador Schuyler, Robert, Excellencies, colleagues, friends. I'm going to try to leave my camera on. I think it will hold. As I say that, I see myself freezing a little bit. So perhaps I'll turn it off to avoid the risk, like Anita, but it's lovely to see you all. Just to begin, first of all, thanks very much, both for organizing this and engaging us in this discussion on the status of the funding compact. I'm especially happy to be here for this panel, because it's one where we really begin to focus on the kind of quality aspects of the funding compact. There's lots of good targets in there, quantitative targets, things that are fundamentally important to getting funding levels for flexible funding to where they really are strong enough to have the scale to promote change. But this session is super important because it focuses on these quality aspects, in particular of pooled funding. And what is the role of pooled funding in promoting that strategic policy transformation and effectiveness? So a lot has been said already. I'll try to go quickly and not repeat, because both Anita and Brian and previous speakers in the first panel have set the table extremely well for my comments. So on that qualitative and transformational aspect, maybe just to say that interagency pooled funds, these are unique partnership-based instruments that really enable these kinds of integrated approaches to the SDGs. They're really not and shouldn't be treated as or seen as kind of joint bank accounts or collections of projects. And if they are, that's often where they go wrong in a performance effectiveness sense. They are that kind of strategic instrument that allows us to flexibly, at a system level, whether it be global or country, deliver on that integrated agenda. So it's often said in these sessions, and at the same informal session at the Funding Compact the last time, I think it was our colleague from the Netherlands, in fact, that stressed a point that pooled funds are to the UN system what core funding is to an entity, that same flexible strategic characteristic. And that's why they're important. what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about how do we make sure that they are that instrument and they aren't just a collection of projects, or what's seen as a joint account for funding a collection of projects. Because of what we heard in the statistics about the overwhelming majority of the funding to the UN system being earmarked, and within that the overwhelming majority, 80% of the earmarked funding to the UN system is projectized, that's where this role of having instruments that draw together the coherence and the partnerships really can help make this change possible. So they are really, can you still hear me? I was just hearing some noise on the line, but it was maybe a non-mute. They really are these instruments that can help that strategic change from project level support or project level approaches to integrated policy and strategic level approaches happen, because they're designed specifically to enable that kind of approach. So 3 points quickly on how does this happen with pooled funds. First of all, through programmatic integration, and others have spoken about this. When we look at either at the country level with a cooperation framework that sets a theory of change for that cooperation framework, or if it's a global fund like the Spotlight Initiative, as Anita mentioned, that sets a theory of change at scale around a significant outcome. It is that multidimensional programmatic integration that is the guiding light that allows pooled funds to perform, because then you have an operational instrument that allows you to deliver on that as distinct from a more siloed approach. We see that, as I said, with the examples like the Spotlight Initiative that is framed at the global level, but delivered through joint initiatives on the ground within the context of a cooperation framework led by RCs and with a shared delivery and design and engagement of multiple agencies. The second how this happens with pooled funds to make that strategic and policy level delivery possible, distinct from a more projectized approach, is that they necessarily enable collaboration and they necessarily require multi-partner collaboration. You can't have a pooled fund without, in a way, forcing that interaction and that interrogation of partners around a common objective. And that in itself helps eliminate duplication, helps find efficiencies, helps find commonalities, and helps different partners work toward their mandates and the strengths that they bring to the table. And there are also plenty of examples of this type of at-scale pooled fund collaborative effort. The Peace Building Fund is a great example of that. The UN Disability Fund, another very, very important rights-based one that demonstrates that very clearly. The third way that pooled funds help to make this project to programmatic and integrated policy level interventions possible is, and others have mentioned this, Stephen and Per and others, is that they allow for the UN to be positioned with catalytic financing. And it's very difficult for bilateralized project type funding to do this because of the terms of a particular project. They don't have the flexibility and usually the scale to position the UN system into a catalytic financing role. But because the Joint SDG Fund is constructed as a coalition and as that collaborative instrument, it both has that flexibility and the scale, preferably more scale, since as everyone says it's under-resourced, but that it has demonstrated the ability to perform that catalytic financing function. And that is absolutely essential, as we all know, for Agenda 2030 and delivery of the SDGs, that wider financing environment engagement is enabled, not all funded through the joint SDG fund, but you have instruments, as Stephen was saying, that enable that catalytic role on the ground for wider SDG financing. So a couple of final points. That's how they can make this transition, those three different ways. And a couple of final points on just what do we know from experience now on what makes them work well, pooled funds. And this is where the funding compact and the specific commitment around the common management features of pooled funds, commitment 14, is really, really important. It's the first time really that lays down not only a quantitative target around pooled funds, but a qualitative features that we know are essential for success for them to perform strategically and not in a kind of collection of projects way. And what are those quality features? They are innovation, a clear, well-designed theory of change. So that pathway, as Stephen was referring to change and to the results is clear. Results management systems really strongly in place at the fund level for the joint outcomes of the endeavor, good governance structures and capitalization, joint evaluations, all of those things that are laid out in that commitment in the funding compact are really essential, and they're evidence-based. They're based on learning from years of designing and delivering these pooled funds and seeing what works well and what are the success factors. And those were built into that commitment. So those are really essential. And then, as Sarah was saying, it's important to go from ad hoc approaches to the more institutionalized approaches. So I've given examples of funds that are doing this, but I think it's also important to say that we're investing a lot of energy over the last year or so in developing a new version of our Gateway Fund Management platform, the MPTF Gateway platform, that institutionalizes into our systems these quality feature requirements of pooled funds. So funds that will have to have a clear, strong theory of change and a results-based management system in place in order to be delivered and administered through the system. So and gender markers, as Anita was saying, for example. So those qualitative features we're building into the design of the systems for pooled fund administration to make sure it's consistent and institutionalized across the board. I won't say more on the country level funds. I think a lot has been said already, really just to agree with the observations that have been made and to say that that's a new generation of pooled funds that we're working with many, many country teams on now on these design. And then maybe in closing to say, as is often said in these discussions, that you get to the UN that you fund. And so this discussion time spent on the quality features of what will help the system deliver to the promise of the SDG agenda and reform. It's really important to keep this partnership and this dialogue going around the quality of funds at the system level, flexible, non-core funding, the core funding being at the level that it should, and we all have our role to play. It's a very good example of why a compact is important here, because we all have our role to play to make sure that happens. Thanks very much. And I know time is not our friend at the moment, so Charlotte, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for reminding us that pooled funds are really strategic instruments and what is required to make them such. And good reminder, you get the UN that you fund taken. So I think, let's see if we have any. Right, we have Gulden would like to come in from UNDP. Are you with us? Hello? Yes. I think you are muted. don't hear you yet. We see you. If you could just perhaps unmute, even if you don't unpicture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Charlotta. Thank you, Robert, and all the colleagues, Anita, others, Jennifer, who have spoken before. This is such an important discussion and very timely. As we know, the funding compact is such a critical part of UNDS reform, and can't stress how important it is. It is a political commitment, but a behavior change from all of us. So I think we are moving in the direction, a bit slow, but we are getting there. I wanted to just touch on the call for rebalancing the core and non-core contributions to the UN development system, and recognizing the limitations that highly earmarked project level funding model poses to the sustainability of the UN development system. And I believe, as Per said, and as underscored by the findings of his foundation study, that if this model remains unchanged, of course, the reform agenda could fall short, and there's a real risk actually that the UN funds and programs could be reduced to mere implementing mechanisms for large vertical funds, IFIs, and bilateral aid programs. So it is so important that we begin to shift and pivot away from the highly projectized funding model. In UNDP and together with colleagues from the system, we're looking to shift to a more strategic portfolio approach for our funding and partnership, especially as we design the new strategic plan. We're looking to align and manage our projects as portfolios comprising obviously of short, medium, and long-term interventions, supported by research, advocacy, and investment. So instead of engaging partners on small individual projects and following this piecemeal approach of just going for funding, we are looking to bring in more thematic discussions, advocacy, and co-create with partners and the rest of the UN system at the country level to actually really focus and refocus our efforts on systemic change as may be needed at the national level. In the case of UNDP, with only 13% of our funding in core and 2.6% in thematic funding, we have a real long way to go, and we will struggle to make this portfolio approach, but we are ambitious, and together with all your support, we hope to make it. Just one final thing about pooled funding. We're grateful for prioritizing contributions to thematic and pooled funds, especially as we've heard how they drive a more coordinated and coherent action. And I can speak from my time at the country, this is really, really true. However, I want to emphasize one thing. It's critical that the shift is happening, that the funds are coming from highly earmarked funding to thematic and pooled funding, and not at the expense of core funding. If member states pull money away from core funds of our core mandate and put it to highly earmarked or thematic pool, it's not going to work. It has to be the shift from the highly earmarked funding. Adequate and predictable core funding remains really irreplaceable for the UN funds and programs, as many have said, to carry out normative mandates, uphold universal principles, and deliver on strategic plans through country offices and support the collective UN response. And as we've seen, in our COVID-19 response, how we were able to do that without core funding, we wouldn't be able to respond so quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very helpful perspective from the UNDP. Next we have Siv from Norway, please.
Thank you very much, Charlotta, and thanks to all the speakers for their very useful presentations today. It's been a very interesting conversation. So Norway is also a strong supporter of the funding compact, as you know, and we're doing our best to follow up on the commitments. It is not always that easy, but we are trying our best. So I wanted to ask Jennifer a question, because you talked about commitment number 14, which is to have a common management feature across all the interagency pooled funds. And we are particularly interested in this and following it closely. And you talked about the ongoing work to have like a common model for all these funds. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on it. And we're also very eager to be part of that conversation. So if you are planning to consult with us as member state on that work, and to say a little bit more about how you are proceeding on that particular work. That's what we are interested in. So thank you very much.
Are you muted, Ambassador?
Sorry. I was saying that I don't see any more questions in the chat, and so tell me, of course, if I'm missing a raised hand. But time has somehow flown out of our hands. It is noon. I'm gonna steal a few minutes from the next session. I hope that's acceptable, so that we can have a chance to hear back from the panelists. I'm gonna also unabashedly throw in a question for Brian. What might better incentives be? The discussion that you're having now. And also for Anita, if you could say a few words about Spotlight from your perspective and the experience of UN Women as a small agency with a very strong mandate at country level with these funds. Maybe we can start. We'll start with Jennifer, perhaps, and go in the other direction.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Siv, for that follow-up question on Commitment 14. As we said, it's this, just like you, we're working on it very closely, and it really is at the heart of getting to the quality side of this kind of transformation on our joint approaches and instruments and pooled funds. So the common management features that are spelled out there, what I was referring to is that we're building in the MPTF office a new generation of our gateway platform. So not to be confused with the special purpose trust fund that Robert calls a gateway now, so we might need to get that name changed. This gateway platform is the next generation of the MPTF gateway that we've had for 15 years. And is our basic transparency platform. But what we've worked on over the last year or so is a 2.0 of that platform, exactly designed to build in the fund management features when we administer pooled funds as a trustee, for ensuring that these quality management features of Commitment 14 are systematized. So what does that mean? It means that, for example, when a pooled fund is being designed and then reported on, that the feature that the commitment calls for around RBM systems or around strengthening the normative features like gender equality or having a strong theory of change, those are automatically built in to the design and approval processes, the fund level approval processes for programs. So when, for example, when the joint fund is running a new, joint SDG fund is running a new call for proposals, because of the way the system is built when we administer it, their program proposals that come forward for approval are going to have required fields that have the quality of results management already built in, the gender markers already required, the SDG markers for results already required. So funds are going to be tracked to, funds and results are going to be tracked to SDG outcomes, to the results framework, etc. And the same with tracking the system evaluations, etc. They're all, it's all built into the online platform of fund administration that we do, that's being rolled out. So it's just a way of making sure that these commitments are not only expressions of good practice, but that they become required features when we're administering the funds. So we're happy to spend, we will do briefings on it as we roll out. So we'll do a first testing, kind of go live over the summer, and then start briefings in the fall when people are back from holidays, and do briefings with partners and with agencies and with fund partners. But we're very excited about it because we really think it's going to up the game on these quality and strategic dimensions of transparency even further. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Brian, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the great question around incentives. I think, for me, R&R, recognition and resources are two very powerful incentives. And on the recognition front, I think we all need to be very mindful, particularly those of us on the DCO side, resident coordinators, that UN reform does not mean some kind of hiding the agencies underneath the single UN flag. It's really important that the technical expertise of individual agencies and programs is recognized. This is the knowledge that we're trying to bring to bear for countries, and it's really important that we don't inadvertently do something silly with a joint program and lose the value and recognition and celebration of the work from those agencies. So recognition is one. Number two is part of recognition somehow is the encouragement from the member state side. I think a lot of member states are doing that already. It's both member states, those contributing to development programs, so it's very important there. And there are some obvious champions of pooled funding, but there are others who are perhaps less so they could do more. But it's also on the host government counterpart side, where we would like to see also recognition of the value of the working together of the UN. And then the third one on the resources side, Stephen talked about it, the value of the global joint SDG fund. If there was a kind of matching approach, right, so that country teams could use a little bit of the global joint SDG fund as a kind of offer so that they could be matching to other potential investors into joint programs, that would be a huge incentive. So those are a couple thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then Anita, please.
Thank you very much. And to your specific question on Spotlight, I do think the Spotlight is a good example where it works of project-based interventions moving beyond the project-based intervention approach to something that is more comprehensive, more participatory, and really has stakeholder engagement at a level that drives transformative change. And I think it would be fair to say that in many places, it is contributing to much more coordination and more efficient UN country team delivery of joint results, with UN Women as the technical experts, as Brian was saying, along with UNFPA, helping resident coordinators to bring the UN system together, and the work consisting of both the technical guidance for very concrete actions at the regional and the country level, but also very strong and meaningful involvement of civil society to ensure more sustainable outcomes that benefit from that grassroots knowledge. And I think the results are powerful and are a good indicator of when it works, it can work really well. So in 2020, the data show that 650,000 women and girls were able to access essential EVA services. 84 laws and policies were strengthened. And to me, this last data point is actually perhaps the best indicator of success, and that is that there was a 32% increase in the proportion of national budgets that were allocated to preventing violence against women and girls in 10 countries. I think there's still quite a lot of learning to be done, and more investment and efforts required across the system to really realize the full potential of this significant allocation of resources. But I think we are definitely, there are definite examples of success that can be replicated and scaled up across the system. Thanks, and back to you.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you all three. And Robert, I think we're moving on to the next part of the program.
Yes, thank you, Charlotte. Thank you so much. This was a fantastic panel, and these are critical issues for us in terms of enabling policies and instruments to make our strategic changes that we're trying to do. So thank you, Charlotte, and to the panelists. So let's turn to our final item, which is another key piece of it, of course, which is reporting, transparency, and accountability. Very important from the member state side, looking across the aisle, if you will, at the UN. Some of this long-standing calls for different behaviors by the system, but above all, more consistency. I think that it's not enough that a couple of agencies are doing the IATI thing. You want everyone. Not enough that a few agencies have agreed on, common policies on cost recovery. It's got to be consistent. We don't want multiple UNs. We want one. And so I think we're pushing hard on this, and some lots of potential, lots of obstacles. Of course, none of it's easy. Otherwise, it would have happened. But we've got three tremendous resource persons to share a little bit their insights on this. Rosemary Kalapurakal, who is my deputy at DCO, recently appointed, but previously head of policy and programming in DCO, so has been immersed in a lot of these issues from that policy and programming perspective now for several years. As I mentioned, Chandra Ramanathan, the controller for the United Nations. Thank you so much for joining us, Chandra. It's really fantastic, and I think it's not fully appreciated necessarily by everyone just how many parts of the Secretariat are also integral parts of the UN SDG. And those parts actually move as a group because they are essentially governed by one body. So if we can get it right for one, we have a kind of major multiplier effect. But that being said, needless to say, it requires member state cooperation. So I think this is a great opportunity to raise some awareness on that. And then Fiona McClooney, now the resident coordinator in Albania, previously in Montenegro, is also going to weigh in on the reporting side and so forth. So thank you, the three of you. And I think, if I may, I'm going to turn straight to Rosemary to start this conversation going. Go ahead, Rosemary. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I've been listening to this informal with great interest, and I realize that there's a lot of recurring themes. And so I won't repeat, rather I'll try not to repeat too much of it, but I'd like to take a deep dive into some of the details, especially in areas where you've had comments and questions about transparency and accountability, and perhaps the pace of implementation, just to give you a look behind the scenes of what it takes to make all of this happen. And indeed, as Robert said, I've been with DCO practically since its infancy, and so I speak from the heart. First of all, I'm very encouraged by the endorsement that I've heard in repeated sessions since May of the finding that RCs and UNCTs working together have indeed delivered a real shift during 2020 in terms of relevance and results and contributions, especially needed and evident in a world suffering so much from the devastations of COVID. We know that the results are not as fast and sweeping enough as we all would like. But let me tell you of what that what you do see reflects a breadth and depth of selected investments we've made in terms of knowledge, time, financial resources over the last 2.5 years to deliver on the funding compact commitments. What are these? First, joined up programming is a clear prerequisite for coherence and effectiveness. Brian has spoken extensively about the cooperation frameworks and the rollout, but behind the scenes, there is an ecosystem of support from across the agencies, DCO offices and RC offices that is enabling this greater cohesion and engagement around shared UN country team results. From facilitation of strategic prioritization retreats and consultations with stakeholders to boosting the system-wide engagement in regional peer support groups to ensure and working with agency partners to ensure that country programs are indeed derived from agreed strategic priorities. This work is deliberate, it is strategic, it is slow, but it is really critical and it is moving. By the end of 2021, as Robert mentioned, over 50% of our country teams will have new generation cooperation frameworks, and we are learning and integrating into them the COVID response and ideas for how we can work better with the system coming together as we did for the COVID socioeconomic response to analyze, respond with clear roles for the RCs, technical leads, and for the UNCTs as a whole. The second, the huge investments in processes and systems. It's a bit boring, but really necessary for transparency and accessibility, as well as clarity of communications. So one is, you've heard in our reporting that we've gone from 86 UNCTs having reported at the country level in 2019 to 110 as of end May, annual reports that are now on our public website. And these reports are livelier, more evidence-based, more visual than ever before. Revamping this reflects the new guidelines that have been put in place, the technical support to RCOs and UNCTs, but also leveraging the new communications officers we have in our partnership with DGCs. We have better websites. At the global level, it's already in English, French, and Spanish, and it will be launched in all official languages next month. But the public website also includes the online SPTF portal. It links to the COVID data portal. And as you know, last year we began posting cooperation frameworks online ahead of executive board sessions so that as you look at entity-specific CPDs, you can easily monitor the linkages between the CPDs and relevant cooperation frameworks. Moreover, 100 country teams have been supported to bring their websites onto the DCO-backed system. Not only is this more cyber secure, but they are in over 20 languages and they're more efficient. They're capable of pulling data directly from our information systems. And let me tell you that the 39 country team websites that are already powered by good UN info data are light years ahead of the others in terms of results reporting, showcasing which entities work on which SDGs where, and what is the source of funding and who are the implementing partners. So let me come to UN Info, which you've heard about so often. This is the common results and reporting platform for the UN system. And over the last 2.5 years, there's been huge amounts of technical work done by our teams to update the platform. But there's also continuous daily country by country support to help country teams get onto the platform. They all got a storefront during the COVID response. And you heard from Robert, the DSG and the SG, that this allowed us to report to you in aggregate with quantified results on the system's contribution to the socioeconomic response. The platform continues to be revamped to include other modules, including in business operations strategies and common premises, so that we have it all in one place with plans, analytics, etc., to facilitate reporting on implementation on those dimensions as well. And we're really excited about the new UNSDG data portal that will be launched in the coming months, which means that the functionality we know about UN Info will now become visible to you as well on the cooperation frameworks and the COVID-19 work. This is a huge step forward and huge amounts of work. Third, a focus on evaluations. I know you want to hear this, and the work that we're now doing with the UN Evaluation Group, and as it comes on stream, the System-Wide Evaluations Office, is really a critical increase in our capacity. There is an increase, as you know, in the percentage of cooperation framework and UNDAF evaluations that contain actionable recommendations with clear target audience and a time frame for implementation, from 37% in 2019 to 62% in 2020. Obviously not good enough, but it is clear progress. And we are working with the UN Evaluation Group on guidance and quality assurance as well. Let me finish up by talking about areas where we need to do more. We know that, and where the challenges lie. One is funding frameworks and joint work plans. Ryan has spoken to it, and we continue to prioritize this. Gender progress. From 9 UNCTs that reported on the gender scorecard in 2018, we now have 38. There is a huge increase, obviously, in percentage terms, but it's simply not good enough. And you have our commitment that we will continue to pay attention to this issue and work with the system and UN Women to improve our progress in this regard. Reporting more consistently and comprehensively on the system-wide contribution to the SDGs. Our COVID response showed you what's possible, but it's really very complicated. It's not as straightforward because it's not easy to aggregate on the system-wide contribution when our country-level programs are tailored so well to the specific needs of countries in widely divergent settings with indicators and results that can't be easily aggregated. But we have begun a process under the UN SDG core group to explore options to enable such collective reporting. And on UN Info, this is clearly critical for results reporting, but under 40 UN country teams are currently using the full platform. There are significant transaction costs for entities as they have their own systems as well, and we have considerable work ahead to help streamline this. And it's also a plea to the membership to avoid putting additional reporting demands as donors and boards to help ensure a move faster towards this more streamlined reporting. And I don't need to repeat what everyone else has said in terms of funding and streamlined accountabilities. That is at the heart of what we need to do together as part of our collective compact commitments. As I said, I've been from DCO from the start, and I didn't know at the beginning whether this ask from member states in terms of this ambitious reform would pay off. If I have to choose two statistics that let me sleep better at night, it's these. 91% of program country governments perceive the UN to be more relevant to their country's development needs compared to 3 years ago, with LDCs and LLDCs having the highest positive assessment, followed by SIDS. My heart is joyous when I hear that. And 77 report that since the UN repositioning in 2018, the UNDS now works together better. To me, it is a reassuring endorsement of the funding compact's stated objective that the ultimate UN development system does more and delivers better together. So not fast enough, not good enough, but it is, I hope you will agree, an encouraging start. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. Great numbers to end on. Let's go straight to Chandru to share a bit how the Secretariat is looking at some of the critical issues. Chandru, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Robert. I think Rosemary has made my job a lot easier since she's covered a lot of the ground that I was hoping to cover. So maybe I'll take the opportunity to put it in a broader context of what's happening in the Secretariat in development and beyond. So maybe a few quick thoughts to start with. The push for greater transparency in accomplishing results as opposed to reporting on expenditures. So to me, I always joke, I just came from a committee on contributions this morning that's discussing the scale of assessments. One of the things I told them is the UN's budget can be on autopilot when it comes to spending. But the bulk of it is people. So you hire people and the money gets spent. The question is, what are we accomplishing with those resources? And that's where it's been traditionally one of our weaknesses. Even though we have strategic frameworks, especially on the assessed contribution side, the reporting has not been as robust as we would have liked it to be. On the voluntary contribution, the donors have been far more demanding. But on the assessed contribution, in my view, sometimes these frameworks are so defined at such a almost in the stratosphere that managers can get away without delivering, and those who deliver well do not have the ability to communicate how well they're delivering. So the push for greater transparency and accountability for results has taken many different shapes. In the committees, in the CPC, and in various fora, we're pushing more and more for greater accountability for results. And we are, as Rosemary pointed out, we've also built our ERP to focus more on results as opposed to purely focusing on the financials. And as you are all aware, most of the ERPs don't do this. We had to custom build this. And so as we have built that now, we are pushing for a harmonization, not only within the development, but also across development and other pillars, peace and security, because the member states tend to treat each stream of funding so fundamentally different that it goes back to one of the issues that was raised before. Our ability to report is constrained by the inability to harmonize the way data and processes and policies come together. We literally buy a product, we don't call it the same thing across different funding streams. You cannot therefore harmonize. That's a serious limitation when it comes to systems and how they are able to collate information. And that's been part of the reason why our efforts at greater transparency in reporting information have always run into trouble. I just heard Rosemary mention about how the specificity of each country can make it difficult to aggregate. Now imagine if you just look beyond the development pillar and you looked at peace and security and humanitarian and try to bring them together. That's one part of the problem. But within the Secretariat, the funding streams for assess budget for regular budget versus assess budget for PK follow fundamentally different processes and different strategic frameworks. When we try to put them all together, I have so much sympathy for the program managers who now have to mash together these different programs that don't speak to the same language, then put the resources together on pooled funding. Even within the Secretariat, those who have pooled funding from multiple sources have to struggle to figure out how to make it work. And a lot of our time is spent on the mechanics and not actually on the delivery. So I think one of the things we're trying to do here, and this is where, again, we need the active support of the member states, is the willingness to harmonize where it makes more sense. And that harmonization is not at the expense of the information that you seek. If the information can be made, there's a lot of data that can be made available. The question is, do they talk to them? Do they mean the same thing? I could not even get a common definition of an employee across the UN system. When it came to IPSAS accounting, it was that difficult to even define an employee. So if you're now talking of employee-related costs, you can't define an employee. And yesterday we were asked in the ACABQ, can we have a secretariat-wide organigram? We said we can't even define the Secretariat. How can we define the organigram of the Secretariat? I can give you an aggregation of the individual departmental organigrams, but I cannot call it the Secretariat's organigram simply because there is no definition of the Secretariat. And part of this is because of all the political compromises that we make when we end up with all these terminologies that don't make any sense anymore, and it just makes the whole process more convoluted. So just to make the overall point that we have now rolled out an ERP solution that is capable of not only capturing results, gender markers, youth markers, SDGs, all of that is available. More importantly, it has the ability now to support multiple frameworks at the same time. So you can link to a 2030 or you can link to a 2063 all at the same time and break it down in more granular fashion. But that's just the tool, right? The change management that is required to get managers to embrace that. So we have a few pilots happening, for instance, the Office for the Special Advisor for Africa, where they are rethinking the whole process of planning. It goes to the whole cycle of the planning, the reporting, and the implementation and the reporting. So people are rethinking all of that. So, but we need the power of example to drive the behavior in other places. And on the SS budget side, unfortunately, and I said this to the ACABQ, and I probably shouldn't be saying it's very politically incorrect, is that I have not much great faith, and as the controller, I shouldn't be saying this, not much faith in the budgets, simply because I believe there is no incentive in these budgets for the performers. There's too much incentive for the non-performer because of the abstraction of the results. If the results and the resources are not tightly linked, and the Secretary General said this in a meeting recently, that the link between the resources and the outcomes is lost. A lot of sense. So we have a problem, therefore, in our overall approach. And so if assessed budgets is the bulk of our budgets, and the bulk of that cost is staff costs, and we don't have timesheets to associate what they are working on, how can we faithfully report on the outcomes and the link between the resources and the outcomes? So this is part of our challenge now, and that's what we are trying to address. So within the Secretariat now, I think it's going to be probably part of the managers' compacts, senior managers' compacts, to embrace and adopt programmatic performance reporting, and we are pushing increasingly, not for annual performance reporting, but for quarterly performance reporting. And we are now preparing quarterly financial statements, and it's my hope that in a year or so, we'll get to monthly financial statements. And we can get there, then we will be in a position to report even more. And we have also started now providing monthly data to the ACABQ and the member states in a way that we never did it in the past, but that's still financial information. It's not programmatic information. We've put out a resource website, which now says, as we are formulating the budgets, what is the programmatic content of those budgets, right? But now we want to link it to the performance and present the financial and the thematic program delivery all together. So there's a lot of investment, just building on what Rosemary said, a lot of investment being made on systems, processes, and the change behavior that's necessary to move people in the direction of accepting that their delegation of authority came with a responsibility to be accountable for the delivery of results. And we want to be able to see that they have processes in place to make sure that they are in a position to deliver. One last point I want to make is also on the issue of an additional investment that's been made in technology, is in terms of how to bring information visually together, but source the information internally as well as externally. So when the UN does joint work with many people, it's possible to bring information together. And as part of the ERP, we also rolled out a module for implementing partners. So that module now allows us to not only channel our funds to our implementing partners, but allows those implementing partners to report back not just on financial performance, but on program performance, so it can blend into our programmatic results reporting as well. So there's a lot of foundational work that has happened, and we are pretty confident over the next year or so, there'll be a lot more information that becomes publicly available, both within the Secretariat and outside. So I'll just stop there and be happy to take on the discussions as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandru, and really big thank you, because I don't think we've ever had this conversation with you in a public setting like this, and so you're a very welcome, if sobering, addition to the conversation. So thank you very much for sharing that extremely important perspective. Now we turn to Fiona McClooney, who is the RC, as I said, in Albania, and she'll speak on the experience of one country team that has invested in these reporting systems on UN Info and the payoff. Fiona, give us a sense of where the vision, where we can end up if we're lucky, if we work hard.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you, Ambassador Shilina, for inviting me today to give the Albania experience. This is a presentation that should, if it runs smoothly, include some slides from our team on the ground, and also a few words from me. I'll probably take about 6 or 7 minutes or so. So I'm pleased to be invited to give this country perspective and to highlight the benefits of this new generation UN information system, and particularly the move from UN Info version 1 to UN Info version 2. But before doing so, I think it's useful to note that UN Albania has been an early adopter of system changes in the past. It was one of the delivering as one countries in 2007. And then since then, we've had 3 rounds of implementation of the UN-wide development assistance framework. Online, we have 2 of the previous RCs that led those systems, those frameworks. So there's a critical audience out there for me. And this strategic planning across agencies and with government has provided a well-established framework for joint work planning and defining the roles and responsibilities of different agencies at a country level. We organise most of our work around outcome areas at the moment: governance and rule of law, social cohesion, environment and climate change, just to name a few. But the work that's done by agencies organised around outcome areas provides a real boost to the buy-in from agencies that's required to get them to input data and to believe in the UN info system and the use of these common information systems. I say that also with experience with a country that didn't have that experience, and it really was a question of getting people to believe that there's a benefit for them and the agencies inputting this information, because often it's duplication and chocolate biscuits don't just work. So we've now moved on to our next United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework in Albania. This will go from 2022 to 26. It's just been finalised pending approval by the Council of Ministers, with hopefully a signature with the new government in September, October. In 2018, when the global UN reform started, Albania had a very well, as I've mentioned, a well-established joint planning and coordination results framework was in place. Albania volunteered to be a pilot for UN Info 1 in April 2019, and within a year had revised some of the key planning and budgetary tools, i.e. the joint work plans, to align and complete the UN Info requirements. We're also one of the early countries to put in the information for UN Info 2, the second version of the information system, and the information will actually be around the results framework anticipated for the launch of the new cooperation framework at the end of the year. Speaking to colleagues about the presentation here, they felt that it was really a valuable feature that the platform now merges other areas of reporting, such as the business operations strategy, the common country assessment, and the socio-economic response plan for COVID. But I'll come to that a bit later. I think this is all well illustrated by the fact that our annual progress report has been so well received. It not only reflects the analysis, and it reflects the analysis that's possible from these new information systems. If all is going well, you will now be receiving, you'll be looking at pictures of the better visualization of results that has been possible. These are shown graphically. Things are easier to read. They're more beautiful to look at, and it requires less lengthy writing to actually show what's been going on at a country level. For the very first time, every activity that contributes to the agreed results is tagged against the SDG goal and target to which it contributes. And I want to also mention the tagging that goes on in terms of gender equality and human rights. It's not just a simple did you or didn't you. This is a 4-point scale which indicates how far we have contributed to this gender equality contribution that's within our overall mainstreaming of gender within the UN. So these are meaningful differentials. We've also got geographically scoped data, which is logged according to where different programmatic things take place, and also additional information has allowed the collective work of the UNCT to be much more evident against the results of the programme of cooperation. In my view, that's also helped us to analyse where the focus of the programming is. It's helped in the evaluation of the previous cooperation framework, or the previous programme of cooperation, and fed into the evaluation of that programme of cooperation in framing the new cooperation framework. And it's also helped us to determine how far the resources go towards programming that relates to vulnerable groups. For the first time, these global indicators for the socio-economic response are also defined and now integrated into the UN info system. You see here the one that relates to social cohesion. These indicators were introduced after actually we had prepared the plan in some places, so we had to go back to where the different indicators prepared at a global level actually reflected what we were doing on the ground. Many UN country teams moved very, very fast in preparing the socio-economic response plans, and then looking at tagging and looking at the information we provided, putting them into a global indicator system, and then allowing that information to actually be reported on a global level was, in my view, amazing. And really the fact that we were doing that in real time, month on month, was actually super impressive. And we could actually talk, for example, within the socioeconomic response plan, we actually talked to the number of children that have received lessons online through support from the UN, for example. And when you amalgamate that across the world, you actually have a very impressive result of the work that goes on with through the collective work of the UN agencies in country. So, I mean, I think this major transformation of transparency and the integration of this UN info public this information into a public dashboard that's then available on a UN Albania website. Now, the standardizations of the websites across the globe has also been, I think, very impressive, and you can actually go to any UN website and see exactly where you are and collect the information that you're looking for. Useful to compare what colleagues are doing, but also useful to see the collective work that we're doing across the world. This better reporting means that donor countries, member states, can view their funded programming in the context of the overall UN efforts to support the government's SDG delivery, not just by going agency by agency perspective. And it helps us produce better analysis and decision making, especially in looking at the balance of the programme. The UNCT and the RCO in Albania can look at relevant and comparative information across the UN agencies' work. For example, funding in Albania is highly skewed to certain SDGs. The SDG 16 gets a lot on peace, justice and strong institutions, gets a lot of substantive programming support. Less substantive money and financing goes around environment, around SDG 6, 7, 12. And that's enabled me to sort of focus in coming new to the job on SDGs which have really been left behind, such as the sustainable consumption and production, SDG 12, where we're looking at some programming, and also focus more on climate change and seeing how that can be a more deliberate focus can be placed on that. The information system gives better understanding of the overall financing framework for the RC to lead with agencies and to seek proactive financing for the cooperation framework gaps. And I think it shows who's contributing how to the cooperation framework. We see which agencies are getting how much money for what things. And it also helps us to have an overview on delivery, who said they were going to do what and how far were they able to, and what kind of interventions might we need to make to see where those gaps are and how we can help those go forward. Sitting alongside, and I think it's worth mentioning in the context of this overall discussion, one of the great advantages in coming to Albania was that we do have an SDG pooled acceleration fund labelled and contributed to by the government in Albania. And that's something that actually allows us to look at financing for SDG delivery, with new financing coming actually to that fund from Sweden recently. And for the first time, the EU has put some of their funding to a joint UN programme in through the SDG Acceleration Fund. So I'd like to mention just two more things before I close. First of all, this UN info system has also enhanced and enabled and strengthened collaboration among data officers in the sub-region, who've also supported each other in learning across the sub-region to input. There's lots, it's still in development, the new system, the version 2, is not yet reached its potential, but our team looks forward to contributing and supporting its success. And we also want to see the alignment between this and the National Development Information System, and I'm pleased to note that the government of Albania is very active in that and is holding information sessions with our officers on that shortly, which we would like to see link in due course, and something we'll continue to keep an eye on. Much thanks goes to DCO colleagues who've put continuous efforts and supports on the really technical nitty-gritty to make this really work. And I think it is a matter of detail, because in order for it not to be rubbish in, rubbish out, and for it to be credible, there's a lot of detail work that goes behind the scenes, both from the country level and also within the DCO technical teams. The better UN info is, the less need agencies have to report separately, and the joint system becomes the go-to source for information on what every agency does and the whole UN does together in country. And I think that should be all of our objectives. Thank you very much.
Fiona, thank you so much. Really excellent. I'm salivating over the thought that we could have that across 131 country teams. Our ability to tell the story I wonder whether, sorry, can everyone mute their microphones, please? I wonder whether, how many executive boards and agencies have had conversations about UN Info and how it can streamline corporate reporting in terms of impact reporting in the individual agencies, or whether those conversations are yet to happen because it's still in its infancy. But it would be something definitely, I hope, that will happen. So the floor is open. Again, as usual, if you could just put your hand up or put in chat, identify yourself in chat that you'd like to weigh in. We've had a really interesting set of interventions from Rosemary, Chandru, and Fiona on accountability, on our efforts to overhaul our systems, our country reporting, our focus on evaluation, the role of UN Info, the Secretariat piece of this puzzle and how critical it is, and then a real life example from Albania of an online platform that's doing what we seek to do, which is to track and report. Any thoughts or comments? It's been a long session, 3 hours. Maybe we're running a bit out of steam. Fantastic. Last drinks, as they say, before we start to wind up. If not, Charlotte, should we start the wind up? I think this was a great session. I think, and thanks from a number of people online. But it doesn't look like there's questions. So yes, we had Gulden and Brian online. So Fiona had to pay tribute to her predecessors, indeed. But it is a reminder too. These things do take years to build. I mean, and I know a lot of these ideas would have started with Gulden, who was, managing the One UN pilot in Albania as RC, and so it does. I mean, hopefully it won't take 10 years, but this is you can see which offices are most advanced: Vietnam, Tanzania, Albania. There's no coincidence that they are all, many of them at least, the original One UN pilot countries, and so we've been at this for a while, and the results are very visible. Thank you very much. Charlotte, I pass you the floor to start the closing session. Again, thank you to our three panelists. Thank you so much, Chandru, Fiona, Rosemary.
Thank you, Robert. I agree with you. This has been a really rich session. This is really the convening power of the compact, and actually foreseen in the compact. But I think I took certainly a lot out of this, and I hope other attendants endured and took things out of each of these very interesting sessions and from the panelists. I'm going to just, it would be hard to try and summarize. I'm going to just get back to a few points, things that I heard. Per, it will be very interesting to see when your report is finished. Is there still a lack of knowledge about the funding compact of both UN and our own embassies at the country level? Well, then we do have work to do. Very helpful perspectives from Albania and from Kenya. And points underlined that national ownership can break down silos and share visions at the country level, like working together, all the actors, to see where we're going, rather than breaking down into our own projects. What makes pooled funds work in the strategic way, I think came out very well during that session. And also it was interesting to hear about updated guidelines underway that could help this move in a good direction. Communication and transparency as important for all sorts of reasons, but also drivers. Private sector involvement and I think this is really something that where we need to step up, and it's hard to find the models, but I think there are good examples at country level that perhaps could be then shared through these communications. I can just mention that parallel to this meeting, we've actually had a session with the Global Investors Network. Really interesting to see, but because I think now that we're, it's time to step up a little bit there and see if that could actually turn into to contributions as we were hoping. Yeah, the reminder of that 91% of program countries believe that the UN is more relevant. That is indeed positive, and a reminder that although there's lots still to do on reform, and we'll keep talking about it, I'm sure, as UN member states with you. This is a good sign, obviously, that we're going in the right direction. Spotlight initiative as a great example, and I think we all need to look more at what makes it, what made it work well, and what else could be sampled. Chandra, controller, very interesting perspectives from you, both in terms of putting a name of the troubles we may have ahead, but also the determination to find ways of making all this more accessible and transparent, and with markers and change management. So that's certainly something that I'm going to follow more closely. I think this could be very interesting. Share of core funding, and I'll come back to that as a final. I mean, that we just need, core funding needs to be a greater share for all this that's ongoing to work better. And I hope that we as member states can take that with us and step up. And I want to throw in a last word for the joint SDG fund as the vehicle for reform and common joint programming and working together that we need now, and hoping that others will see fit to put funds into that fund. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. You kind of captured many of the big ideas that we've gone through, and so I really, I'm going to just add to your voice. Firstly, my thanks to everyone and to our participants who've been very loyal. And it's not easy 3 hours online in one hit without any technical breaks either. So really a big thank you for everyone for your commitment to this funding compact process. I mean, I've got three kind of big takeaways from each of the, of the panels. On the first one, I think the message is just how much potential there is to move this discussion to the country level. And as Stephen said, we kind of need to have the same conversation at the country level that we're having in New York, between governments, between donors, between the UN system, and make sure we get the benefits of this global vision at the country level. So we will certainly, bring it down to the country level. Lots of possibilities, untapped. Awareness is way too low. We'll do our part with the country teams. Please, you do your part with your governments, whether you're a donor or a program country. Please help us advertise this mechanism, this compact, and let's get it operationalized at the country level. I think, secondly, the second session for me really reinforced how much movement there is on financing. We do focus a lot on the importance of core and recalibrating that core piece, and Gulden made that point, and many did, and I endorse it. But today we focused for a change on all the other pieces of the puzzle in terms of financing instruments and where it's going in terms of potentially new partners from the market to the private sector and so forth. I do think, as a three-time RC, where I had a pooled fund, it was a game changer in terms of my ability to shape country team strategy. both as a humanitarian coordinator, as a resident coordinator in Nepal on the peace side. I had the Peace Building Fund, sort of national, a local version of it with help from the global one. And on the humanitarian side in Palestine, I had the humanitarian pooled fund, and they were both, not huge, but more than enough to really kind of shape strategy. And so I can't overestimate the importance of that, or over sort of whatever underline. But we're doing a study at the moment on country-based pool funds in support of cooperation frameworks, because we do think every country team should have one in their pocket as a sort of standard piece of their equipment. So we will share the results of that study. I think it's 38 countries, teams at the moment, maybe Jennifer might have given that number, have got one at the moment, and there really should be a lot more. But of course, if there's no funding, it's also a little bit of a Pyrrhic victory. So we're looking at that at the moment, but it is something we're pushing at a corporate level. Number 3, I think listening to this, the last set of presentations, I think just to recognize a lot of progress is being made in terms of on the UN family side, in terms of reporting systems and instruments online, offline. But a reminder that the Secretariat is a very big piece of it, and 15 of our 34 UN SDG members are all organic parts of the Secretariat, even though Chandra says the definition is a moving target. And so the need to, I guess, enlist your support, as Chandra said, as member states, in making sure now that the enabling decisions are made in the ACABQ or the Fifth Committee that allows the Secretariat, in a sense, to catch up, if I can use that expression. And here, this was the idea. I think the SG's reforms, he saw a lot of potential in infecting the Secretariat, if you will, with some of the agency funds and programs, culture and systems. And if you think about it, this mutual recognition statement that has been signed now by over 20 Secretariat and agency funds and programs has opened up a world of possibilities in terms of the ability of the Secretariat to buy services and piggyback processes from agency funds and programs. And that should indeed start to unleash some interesting kind of competitive processes, competitive in a positive way. But the idea being that, yeah, we can learn a lot from each other. And of course, the Secretariat has these economies of scale that are mind-boggling. So it's a win-win. But we need to be aligned as member states as well as agencies, and that remains a challenge. Messages to headquarters, I hope. 1, on the member state side, still some way to go in terms of reaching the commitments on the member state side of the ledger. 2, the need to really make sure that we align our financing structures and behaviors, if you will, to the reforms. We've got to close the gap between the actual practice and the vision thing. And it needs to not only go across all member states, but it has to go from New York to your capital to the countries where you operate, if you're a donor, or of course, if you're a member state, a program country, to make sure also that there is that alignment in terms of how you're approaching the UN partnership. So the second big message is about aligning the systems to the vision. And thirdly, then, yes, to make sure that this plays out in every capital. Donor, non-donor, this conversation has to happen everywhere, otherwise it remains fairly academic. Today's session was part of the requirement as DCO to organise several times a year these informal consultations on the funding compact, and we've picked several themes. You can see it's getting more concrete as we make progress. Our numbers are firmer. Happily, our progress is better. And so, we will be doing another one, of course, later in the year. And we'll pick up different themes. We'll consult you on what they could be. Just off the top of my head, I'm thinking a few possibilities. One would be a deep dive on the efficiency piece, which I know is important to many of member states. Another could be on the results reporting piece. And I can use that as an excuse to come back to the system-wide strategic document as well. But it is much bigger than that, of course. And then maybe thirdly, a look at the visibility issues around core financing, because that is a perennial issue, and it deserves a panel discussion and a bit of a deep dive about how we get this right. And what it looks like at the country level when you're trying to recognize those 20 or 15 big core finances at the global level. How do you apportion that? How do you attribute that at a country level when you're getting down to that level of granularity? It's worth the discussion, I think, for everyone to participate in. Lots to talk about, lots of progress, and above all, a lot of collaboration in all of these stories. So I end there with a thanks to Charlotta for agreeing to co-lead this. It would have not been right to have done it unilaterally. So thank you so much for making this, getting this right, and for your leadership in the conversations we've had. And thank you to my team who've really done some heavy lifting. Risha and Chris, some of the DESA colleagues, to really set us up for success. And to our panelists, thank you so much for your insights. Thank you all very much, and have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.